Welcome to Checking Your Reserve Pay Part 2. This is the beginner's guide to verifying your out-of-country per diems. My name is Jesse Matthews. I am the local 4094 Reserve Committee chairperson based here in Vancouver. In today's presentation, we're going to expand a little bit more on calculating meal allowances, aka per diems. In this particular case, we're going to help calculate any US per diems and then other countries besides that, just as there are a special set of rules for US per diems, and then there's a completely different way of calculating per diems for other destinations altogether. Before we get into anything further in this presentation, just the usual disclaimer that this is for educational purposes only. If there is any discrepancy between this presentation and the collective agreement will take precedence. And if you have any questions about the application of the collective agreement within this presentation, you can reach out to your local union officers or ultimately to the component president for any interpretation of the collective agreement, which will, of course, be final. So let's revisit the calculation of per diems. Meal allowances, what we call per diems more commonly, are calculated using Article 7.02 in the collective agreement. What we focus on are the recognized meal periods. These meal periods apply to Canada and US meal allowances in general, and then also some of our other destinations that don't fall into the overseas classification. In 7.02.02, we have a chart that covers the amount for meal allowances for Canada and the US. The number is the same throughout the chart. The difference is that the number is either in Canadian dollars or US dollars, depending on which meal is paid. For other locations, as specified in 7.02.03, there are semi-regular adjustments to the amounts for these destinations, but they don't change as often, and these are compiled in a PDF that is available on Aeronet. This is uploaded every month, and I've provided a screenshot just over here on the right, showing you exactly where you can go to find any of the meal allowances. I'm going to be using a couple of live pairings from October. So for the purpose of this presentation, I have gotten the October 2021 expenses PDF screenshotted and used in various parts of this presentation. This is what the meal allowance chart looks like in full. So we can really quickly go over how to read this just because there's a lot of information here. Location is fairly straightforward as far as which destination this applies to. This could be a country name or this could be a city name. Just as a couple of examples, we have Canada right here. We have the US right here. And we have Mexico right here, just as several examples of where we see country. Note that for Mexico in this case, this one says Mexico Other, including MEX, that's Mexico City. This is in a distinct category from Cancun, which I will highlight further up here. There are different per diems provided for Cancun as opposed to the rest of Mexico. And we can definitely see that in other spots. There's Ixtapa, that is another Mexican destination where there are separate per diems. So you just get used to navigating the chart depending on which pairings you have. The country code and the station code are provided in a separate column. Let's just see what else we can go over here. Previous allowance will indicate the total amount of per diem you would be entitled to in a day if you were to be given breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snack while on layover. Adjustment indicates what change there was between the per diems listed in this chart and in the previous month's chart. For the majority, this is going to be 0. The one that does change for sure every month is the US portion of the chart. And then from there, we'll go on to the next. So status, that indicates what kind of change there was. Typically, it's just going to say no change for the vast majority of them. Percentage of change indicates how much the per diems have changed by. So you'll see that 0% represents for most of them how much change there was. You will see either a minus percentage or a plus percentage where there has been a change to less per diem or greater per diem. So for example, we have Dublin and Shannon, the change is minus 5.2%. So that means that overall, compared to the previous month, there has been a decrease by this percentage in what all the per diems total up to in a given day. And then finally, fairly straightforward, we have breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack, and then what all 4 of those meals total up to. I will also mention we just have a handful of destinations where there's a bracelet provided if there is a layover, which means per diems are not paid because meals are included with the hotel accommodation provided should there be a layover here. All right, so the mystery of meals is a supplemental document that was issued back in 2008. And this was intended to help make per diem calculation more clear than we have it in the collective agreement. Article 7.02, as mentioned before, goes over the amounts for Canadian and US meal allowances, but there isn't a whole lot expanded on about how the overseas or the other destinations are calculated besides those. So this document is meant to cover all of that, and it's also meant to assist with determining when a Canadian per diem is paid and when a US per diem is paid. So we will look at both of these documents separately. Using the next couple of slides, we'll take one at a time and then break it down. So I've taken a pairing from my October 2021 block month, and we're going to apply the principles within the Mystery of Meals document to determine which per diem or per diems I am entitled to, and then whether that's paid at the Canadian or the US rate. So if we look at this screenshot of my globe, I'm starting in Vancouver, and I am going to Santa Ana. This is a US airport in California. And then I am coming right back from Santa Ana to Vancouver. So we know that my trip involves a US airport. That's going to trigger my mind to check to see if I am entitled to any US per diem as opposed to just Canadian per diem. So if we look at the meal allowances chart, I've truncated it just to make the numbers a little bit easier to access for the purpose of this presentation. So we have the breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack, and total columns. And directly beneath those, we can see what the values are for the US for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snack. Those are the ones we're going to want to use if we are entitled to any US per diem. So let's take a look over at the page of the Mystery of Meals here that we want to apply here. So an important note that's given is we must use actual times and not blocked times. So a pairing might show up in the bid package in a certain way. It might be scheduled to depart at a particular time, but it could either depart early or it could depart late. Similarly, it could arrive early or arrive late. That's color-coded in globe to make it much easier to see, either in green, meaning it departed early, or red, in this case, meaning that it arrived late. If it remains black, that means it is precisely on schedule in the exact same way that it was in the bid package. So here I've got 2 departure times that were early and 2 arrival times that were late. So if we look over at the North American meals chart, this part will be familiar because it looks very similar to what's in the collective agreement. The departures portion is meant to help us determine which per diem is the first per diem that we are entitled to. So let's start with the first one. To receive a breakfast per diem, you must depart before 8 a.m. And that is strictly not true because we can see that even though I departed early, it was 8:29, so this first line does not apply. To receive a lunch per diem, you must depart before 12:30 and be on duty from 12:30 to 1:30. So 8:29 is definitely before 12:30, so that's okay. And then because I am operating to Santa Ana and back, and my checkout time is well past 1:30, since I must depart before 12:30 and be on duty from 12:30 to 1:30, this is all met. So I am entitled to a lunch. To receive a dinner per diem, you must depart before 6 p.m. and be on duty from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. I am definitely not on duty from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. I finished my duty for the day and my entire pairing at 3:50, so this does not apply. For arrivals, since I know that lunch is the first per diem I'm entitled to, I have no need to check for lunch in the arrivals column either. To receive the dinner per diem, I must arrive after 6:30 and be on duty from 5 to 6:30. As we previously established, I complete my duty day at 3:50 p.m. So dinner does not apply, snack does not apply. So we've dealt with the first part. This particular set of criteria for departures and arrivals helps us determine if we're entitled to any sort of per diem at all. So for this pairing, I am entitled to a lunch per diem. So I'm going to put an L just to make it easier on myself. So now we have to determine the Canadian or the US rate. If I were to have a layover, my layover is always paid at the layover rate. And in this case, there is no layover involved, so I can ignore that line. Breakfast is always paid at the rate of the country of departure. I was not paid a breakfast. In this case, if I did get a breakfast, it would be paid at the Canadian rate since I start my day in Canada, but there's no breakfast involved. We established before that only the lunch per diem applies here, so I'm going to cross out the dinner and snack in advance. And now we're going to look at this particular paragraph to check the logic. So we have two if statements. If the flight departs before noon, the lunch is paid at the country of destination. If the flight departs at noon or later, the lunch is paid at the country of departure. So in this case, my flight from Vancouver to Santa Ana departs at 8:29 a.m. It arrives at 11:42 a.m. and we sat there until we departed at 12:41. So we can look at this fairly straightforward. The flight from Vancouver went to Santa Ana and it departed prior to 12. So in this case, it's stating lunch is paid at the country of destination. Similarly, if flight departs at 12 or later, the lunch is paid at the country of departure. If we look at the second flight, which is the flight back to Vancouver, it does depart at 12 or later, so the lunch is paid at the rate of the country of departure. And in this case, this second flight is departing from the US. So when checking it in both ways, this tells us that we are entitled to a US per diem and not a Canadian per diem. And it's going to be a lunch per diem, as we established further up. So in the chart, we can look and find out what the lunch amount is. And when we look, it is $24.02. So that would be the amount that I would want to see in my flight summary as a lunch paid for this pairing. What happens sometimes on reserve is your expenses can be paid at the rate of the wrong country. So in this case, if it were paid at the Canadian rate, it would be lower. The US rate is always going to be higher than the Canadian rate. So you would want to check to make sure that this is the amount paid, and you would file an e-claim for the difference between what you were paid and what you were owed if you don't have the correct per diem in your flight summary. Let's look at overseas per diems. This involves another page from the Mystery of Meals document. And there's an entirely separate timing criterion that we use when referring to our overseas destinations. I've taken a screenshot from another flight attendant's globe just to illustrate a London Heathrow pairing. I've removed the hotel name for the layover portion of that screenshot, and I would advise to all of you, by the way, whenever you're posting any screenshot for the purposes of, say, trading, for example, I would strongly advise that you remove the hotel name as well, just to help protect your fellow flight attendants while they are on layovers around the world. Just in case information does get out, as happens on the internet, we would rather protect everyone that we're working with. On that note, let's look at the overseas meals portion of the Mystery of Meals. So there are several key components to this page. We have scheduled arrival at layover, meal allowances on day of arrival, and scheduled departure from layover, meal allowances on day of departure. The reason we have a different set of numbers and meal allowances relative to overseas flights is because we have meals boarded on our aircraft when we are going to an overseas destination. This is not something that we have when doing domestic flights. We can see in this portion of the Mystery of Meals that the length of the flight indicates what sort of meals we have boarded for us when working overseas flights. Because these are boarded, we don't calculate our meal allowances the same way as we do any other. Instead, the meal allowances we are paid are specific to our time that we are at the overseas station. And on paper, this would be the scheduled arrival at the layover station, all the way to the scheduled departure from the layover station on the day of departure. So if we go to the chart before continuing, we're still going to be looking for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snack. And in this case, we are looking for the London portion. So I'm just going to give this a nice little circle, just so that we can disambiguate from everything else. We have the London Heathrow and London Gatwick portion of the chart. Okay. So for this particular pairing, even though these are the actual departure and arrival times rather than the scheduled departure and arrival times, I looked at them, they're all within several minutes and not making any difference as far as what meals are paid out. So I've just taken this one screenshot. Let's use 10:50 a.m. This is, of course, local time, so this is London time. So the arrival time is 10:50 a.m. If we go back over to the left here to the scheduled arrival at layover, meal allowances on day of arrival, there are three conditions were presented that tell us which meals we are entitled to. So 10:50 a.m. is an arrival before 12:30 p.m., which means that we are entitled to a breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snack on this particular day. And that would be paid at the London Heathrow rate. So in this case, it would be $32.20 for breakfast, $37.05 for lunch, $72.32 for dinner, and $19.35 for a snack. Now we look at the layover time here. It is 26 hours and 25 minutes on layover. This flight departed Vancouver in the evening on the 5th, meaning that it arrived in the morning on the 6th London time. So November the 6th, there would be all four of meal allowances. That again is breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack. That's for the 6th. And now what we have left to do is determine the expenses on the scheduled departure from layover, which is on the 7th. And we can see that the departure time was 2:28 p.m. local time. And over at scheduled departure from layover, we have four sets of conditions that are based on times of day. So 2:28 does not fall within the first line here, so it's not this one. It does, however, fall between 11:30 a.m. to 4:59 p.m. So that means that a breakfast and a lunch are due. And that means for this entire pairing, as far as meal allowances are concerned, there should be 2 breakfasts, 2 lunches, 1 dinner, and 1 snack paid out, all at the London Heathrow rate. And if that is not showing in the flight summary under crew cycle expenses, an e-claim should be filed for the relative amounts missing, and those will be paid out to you on your next paycheck.